So our next speaker is a product designer living in the outskirts of Oakland, and she currently leads the design systems team at Lyft, who are responsible for building, maintaining, and supporting Lyft product language, which spans across mobile and web. Please give a warm welcome to Linzi Berry.
Hello, everybody. I'm Linzi Berry, design systems lead at Lyft, and I am so freaking excited to be here. This is such an inclusive audience, an inclusive stage, so I'm super excited to talk about inclusivity in this place. And thank you all for being so nice and welcoming. For me, that means a lot, because this is my first time talking at a conference. I got lots of nerves, and I'm at 200, so here we go. Okay, cool. So, Lyft. This is where I work, and I also write a bunch of articles on Tap to Dismiss, which is my blog. I like to go over nerdy stuff, so if you like nerdy stuff, please come talk to me. So if you're new to design systems, it's kind of a buzzword right now, but I wanted to just lay out there what we do. So we're an awesome team of people that want to help the designers and engineers at Lyft do their job better. And the things that we do are we write guidelines, we do foundational elements like type and color, and we also do reusable components like these. And that's typically what we think of for design systems. And our goal mainly is to create a coherent and predictable interface for our passengers and our drivers. And when I say that, all I'm trying to say is that when a passenger gets in a car with a driver, that they feel safe, that their app looks like the driver's app, and therefore they know they're in the right place at the right time, their photo's there, the driver's photo's there. It's a good experience for everybody. We also want to reduce design and engineering time and debt, which means we build it once and we build it thinking about all the things so that it doesn't have to be built again and again. And the last thing that's most important for this conference is that we want to raise the quality for all of our users, every edge case, every situation that they're in. So essentially, we're the champions of inclusive design. And we take that pretty seriously. We didn't want to call ourselves a design system. We wanted to call ourselves a product language because it meant that everyone was included, engineers, PMs, copywriters, legal. Because in that way, we're saying that it's everybody. And I wasn't always this preachy about inclusivity. I used to just be a visual designer and cared about how things looked. So to start this, I kind of want to rewind back to when I didn't know about any of this. So my first job was at an agency called Otopod, and there's actually a couple of people here who worked there. So shout out to this amazing company that doesn't exist anymore. So yes. And I'm super tiny, as you can tell. So there's a partition, and the really tiny head next to my good friend Alex is me. And what we used to do at this company was build large-scale design systems for marketing sites. And the process would look something like this. This project in particular was Quizlet. And we would go through a ton of these things called theme boards, where we would put up different type and color and these fake components to get across what the digital brand would look like. All of these are done by an amazing designer, Vicki Angie. At the time, I was an associate design director there, so this was part of my work with her, and I want to give her a shout out because she's awesome. But we do things like this. So this was one version, we had another version, million versions. And the goal here is really to say, okay, what is your brand? What is your look and feel? And how can we get this to feel the most like what you consider your brand to be digitally? And that means aligning on things which are now design systems. We didn't really call it that back then, but now it is. So we would agree on things like type, color, and components. So all things we're used to today, and in Figma and Sketch, everyone today is talking about these types of things as well, so reusable components. And the goal is to define the look and feel of the brand, so delightful and refined, not childish and edgy, and this takes a ton of time and months of work to really get in and hone in on this brand. So for this project in particular, for Quizlet, we went through months of this work, putting it all together, and one day I get a call from the client, and they're like, we need this to be level AA, WCAG compliant. So I Googled what seemed like a random assortment of letters to find that there's actually rules about color contrast ratios, which is nuts to me. And I had never heard of any of it. And it was like, okay, the text needs to be 4.5 to 1 on the background. And that didn't really mean much besides that there was now a rule, and I'm a rule stickler, so I needed to follow it. So we tested it on our colors. And the first two were great. I'm like, oh, awesome. We're doing so good, right? And then I put white on top of yellow and teal, and not doing good. And as you may assume about me, with my 200% personality, I need to have A's. And this was a straight up F. And I was like super crushed. And I'm like, this rule that I didn't even know existed, now it's like telling me I'm bad. So I got mad about it. And I like went back to the client and I'm like, this is for kids. Like, kids have perfect vision. Like, why does this matter? Like, they'll be fine. And Quizlet was great. Quizlet came back and they like came into our company and they brought us this $250 Chromebook and they're like, look, these kids are from low-income families. They're getting these from their schools. Like, this is what this looks like to them. And they pulled up Quizlet. They pulled up our comps on this device. And I'll tell you what. Oh, yay, it showed up. Okay, I was super worried that the presentation would also have the same problem that the Quizlet Chromebook did, and it didn't. So great. So our comp would look something like this, right? And when it showed up on the Chromebook, all the nice grays and like desk setting that's in that top image would completely blown out. And also, things where we were using this like neon teal font, you couldn't even read it inside the bubbles on the side. And I'm sure all of you have gone through this. If you're a designer, you go to a company to do an interview, you have beautiful grays in your screens, and you go and show it, and then you're looking at it on the screen, and you're like, ooh, it's all gone now. And you're like, I swear it's beautiful, just like, turn it down, like brightness down a little. And they're even building apps now that fix that for you, which is like crazy. But yeah, so it meant something to me. And this was really a turning point in my career in caring about accessibility, because I realized that designing to meet these guidelines didn't just mean designing for a physical impairment like low vision, but it meant, you know, situational disabilities as well, like viewing it on this Chromebook. So after this, every time I learned a new guideline, I really cared about it, and I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to be the champion of these inclusivity guidelines, and I'm going to help others see their obvious and hidden values. Now, that's not always easy, because these have foes, and they're not bad foes. Like, I can kind of understand where Thanos is coming from, and like, Circe maybe not, but like Silky's got some things going for her. Do I have any RuPaul's Drag Race fans in the house? Yes, Team Evie though, sorry. But you go against some foes, and they're big foes from the design, from your company, from design, from all these things. And those foes are things like brand look and feel, feature creep, and business priorities. So it can be hard. It can be hard going against these things, and how do you sell this to your company that inclusivity matters, right? And big companies struggle with it too. This is a coworker of mine informing me politely that my Twitter accent color is not accessible. I had picked yellow. And this was a moment where I was like, man, even these big companies aren't offering things that are truly accessible. So like, why is this so hard, and what can we do to fight that? So that's what I want to talk about today, how to make designing for inclusivity more accessible for everyone, and how to use scrappy prototypes and settings and various other things to kind of sell this across, because the more you can do to build empathy, the better off you are with your entire company. So we'll start with brand look and feel. Look at that adorable sun. It's got a cute face on it. Okay, so we're going to fight color contrast against brand. So 2 years after Quizlet, I joined Lyft and to start a design systems team with Linda Dong, who's down there. And the brand was in the midst of a major redesign. Our rider app was going from something like this with heavy use of gradients and like very tiny type to something that was more editorial and had a lot of white space, chunky UI, and bold type. The new direction was bold meets pastels. And you can kind of see where this might be going. Okay, so again, here we are. Lift pink, 3.5. We're not really hitting the 4.5 area. And we tested it, and we look at it, and we're like, okay, cool. Quizlet did this amazing thing for me where they made me care about it, so how can we then make others care about it now that we're at Lyft? So the first thing was to debunk the perception that all accessible colors have to be muted, dull, and bank-like. So Kevin, who's in the audience today, shout out, built this thing called Colorbox. And this was a way for us to say, hey, we can actually do beautiful colors that are accessible. And this is something that's available to everyone, so you guys can also do this. But this was this amazing way to prove that, like, hey, we can still have hot colors, but they're not just the exact color that you wanted before. And then we took the brand color and compared it to the one that we wanted to offer, that was 4.5, to see as close as we could get. And of course, when you're just looking at it like this, you're like, well, that one's brighter and that one's a little bit darker, but like, what does that matter when we actually put it in things? So we prototyped it. So we took the devices that most of our users had, we looked at like common devices across everything, and we put them out here, and we put them on a table, and we're like, okay, cool, this is Lyft Pink across all of them. And one thing that was pretty awesome is that the Pixel 2 was pretty hot. Like, the colors were a little bit hard to read, and we're like, hey, if a lot of people have this, like, this could be an issue with this piece. And people started to understand. And then we put in our more accessible one, and it looked better across, except for now, our newer phones, it looked a little bit muted. And we're like, okay, well, we still want to be accessible, but maybe pink isn't the right color. So then we went to purple, which originally was our pickup color, purple, to begin with. It was just a very much darker one. And we had a better color contrast ratio. And then we put it on all the screens. They actually looked all similar, and we're like, nailed it! So this was pretty great. And then, to further build empathy for these particular color contrast ratios, we took them outside. And we took them to places where our riders and our drivers actually were. So we're going on a curb, and look at the glare on the screen, but I can still read the button. And that was really important to us, because our passengers aren't always inside at a desk calling from their phone. They're in like dark bars, they're in corners, they're getting glare on their screens. And also, super importantly, our drivers have glare all the time, and we have to put it in the car. Sorry for my super dirty car and my screen's covered in fingerprints. But this is real, right? Like, this is a real situation, and we should be testing it in real situations. So when we did all of this and we showed it to leadership, this was enough to convince them that, like, yeah, color contrast is important, and we should care about it because it's real and it's a thing that, like, we can't avoid not existing. So, sold. Next. So, the next battle that you will likely encounter, which we also encountered, is the size of buttons and type against new features and content. So what do I mean by that? The initial push of the redesign was elegant, right? Like most redesigns, you go for a clear goal, you aim for it, you make it beautiful, and then the redesign's over, everyone's happy, we go back to business as usual, and what happens? Features. And features are not inherently bad, right? Like, we love features, but when you add them to a screen and we don't consider taking them away, it can get pretty cramped. And then what happens is that we actually have 3 usability constraints that come into play. So, the first, tap targets. Can everybody hold up their finger? Okay, now take a look at the person's left to you finger, person's right to you finger. Yeah, cool. So hopefully what you're noticing is that fingers, like people, are all different. And yeah, it was a good thing for us to do, right? And most people, when you're tapping on your phone, you're only using this tip. And some crazy science people went out there and measured that tip. And that's 48 by 48 if we go over a wide swath of people, right, in points. And this is the minimum tap target for anything that we create. So if we make something smaller than this and we expect people to be able to tap it, we have a lot of problems. So interactive elements and how this works. So for things like that checkbox, that size outside of it, we have to let users tap that. Otherwise, there's an accident where they might hit much higher. So we can imagine if we have a bunch of stuff on a screen and we're trying to tap it, it's all crammed in there, doesn't work out so well. The second thing is legibility. So constraint legibility. And the font's legibility is determined by its X height. So if you guys haven't heard of that, it's the size of the X in a font from the baseline to the midline. And that's because that's where the shapes are the most different. So when someone's trying to read, X height is what's helping them out. And that really depends on the distance, which we'll get to in a second, of how far away you are from that font. So one of the things we did with our team was go through and say, hey, at this size, which is like 12 inches away, where we normally hold our phone, what is legible, right? And we determined that 15 point was the minimum for legibility type-wise if we were holding our phone naturally. And we're looking at this and we're like, hey, we should actually bump those up so more users can read more of the information. And the last constraint is distance. I have 2 cats. That's my one cat, Reptar. He's orange. And for the constraint of distance, in particular, it's how far away your eyes are from the device. So when we think about type, and I was explaining the distance before of 12 inches, all of our tap target and legibility guidelines that are out there from Material Design and Hague, they're all about that 12-inch kind of distance. But what happens when we move it even further away, right? Like, we have to consider all these things are changeable depending on distance. So when we think about using things from this distance or TVs, all of those sizings have to be different to remain legible and tappable. So, super important for Rider, which was the app that we started with in the redesign, right? Like, cool, we can use the Hague, we can use Material Design to kind of help us with these rules. But as soon as we got to Driver, that became a much bigger issue because there's not really a lot out there besides Android Auto on what tap target should be or what legibility should be for a mounted device, right? So how can we help the team on Driver better understand to design for legibility, to better understand to design for tap targets? And we struggled a lot with this. Like, do we make a fake car? Do we bring everyone in a car? Do we bring the stakeholders into a car? Like, I can't imagine me bringing, like, the CEO of Lyft, like, here you go, please get in my dirty car. So we thought a lot about it, and where we ended was selfie sticks. So this was our way, and has been a great way, of showing the two designs. So we'll put Rider on the smaller selfie stick, about 12 inches away, and then we'll put Driver at about 20 inches away. And this was like what sold everyone on why Driver needed to be bigger, right? Like, just because you have this fixed distance where they're not reviewing screens this close to their face to understand that. So I'm going to do an experiment with you guys. I'm going to ask you to take out your phones like you're not at a Layers conference and to pull up something like Twitter or email where there's like a lot of type, right? And the first thing I'm going to ask for you to do is hold it at a comfortable length, right? And that's probably around 12 inches, and this is where all those rules are, like tap targets being 48 by 48 and legibility being 14. And now I'm going to ask you to put it like at arm's length, which is about 20 for most people. And hopefully you're seeing the effects of the type being further away. Tap target, if you try to hit it with your other hand, how hard is it to try to like nail something like that? It's a little bit more difficult. And this was a good way, if we didn't have selfie sticks, to kind of say, okay, look at this distance. And now what I want you to imagine is there's a passenger mad in the back of your car. You're driving on the freeway. It's raining out. Right? Like, there's a lot going on, so we need to be really careful about how and what we put on these screens. So the last thing we would do, and this is like pretty great because this would come up in other tests, not even our tests, we're around like actually getting feedback from drivers where we could say in user testimonials, like, there was this little tiny ratio, and it was really hard to read. And this was great because it came from a pool of users that weren't ones that we originally went out for. This was a pool of like 60 and older users who were like, hey, like I can't actually see any of this. And then we're able to say, okay, now anytime that we want to do testing, we have to include all user groups in this basically like much larger inclusivity bucket. So, with our user stories, with selfie sticks, we were able to convince leadership to rethink how we even put stuff on a page. Like, what is the most important thing that needs to be on here? Does this need to go on here? Could this go somewhere else? And I'm sure this is something that all product designers struggle with all the time, so you can even use these selfie sticks to kind of help you get that point across. Lastly, I want to cover the thing that is near and dear to my heart and probably what most people think about when they think about accessibility, which is moving your app scope beyond physically able to the physically disabled. And this part is the hardest because for designers, we have the least control over this, right? It's mostly done in code, and it's a decision that has to be made from high up. So, especially at a startup, you might hear, we just got to ship it. You've all heard it. And like, it's hard because they're trying to convince them that they need to invest in building for a user group, and it takes a lot of time. So many groups at Lyft, not just our team, banded together to give the business-minded reason of why to build for disabled users. So we started with settings and just trying to get them to test out what the app was like in 2 different modes. The first one was text size. The reason why this one is near and dear to my heart is my mom still has an iPhone 4. I don't know how it works. And her text setting is all the way up. She really needs glasses, and she just refuses to admit that she does. So this is kind of like her life, right? And she's over 60, and there's a ton of people who fall into that bucket. So I'm imagining, like, what are the number of users that we could impact if we actually adjusted and made our app work for text sizing? So 45% of our Android users adjust the text size. And this is where we get back into like the ethics of design, where if they want the text size to be adjusted and we're not adjusting it for them, then are we listening to what they're asking for? Are we allowing them to have that control? And that matters, right? So we would do a test. We would push it all the way up, and what happens, right? In the best use cases, poutine finger stash fits within the button. In the worst cases, it pulls out and falls on the ground. And then in like the not so great cases, which is what happens a lot with this, is that we're just turning text sizing off, so we're not listening to what they're asking for. So instead, we were able, through our team, to do a thing with layout where we said, okay, build everything with spacers, constraint-based layout, no fixed sizing. And what that means is that when someone does turn up the type, it still looks great. It just gets bigger. And this also works great for localization, so bonus points. And then the second thing that we did was voiceover. And if you haven't set your home screen to do the triple tap for voiceover, I highly recommend it. This is like the path to get there. But essentially, voiceover is the way that our blind users use our apps. And for me, this was a huge turning point where we got a bunch of people in a room and everybody turned this on. They turned the dimness on their screen all the way down. And what they were able to do is try to go through the app as if they couldn't see anything. And man, it could be a mess. So definitely recommend trying that. And what ended up happening with our app is that we actually had to rethink the hierarchy of the content. And we redid the app for blind users. So when we turn on VoiceOver, and you can try this on your phone after this, you get this giant purple box. And it's because VoiceOver reads everything like a form, right? So it's just going top to bottom, and it's going through all the items. And when it tried to go through our design, it didn't do it great. So we were able to convince them, like, hey, we should put in the time and effort to do this alternate version that can be used by our blind users. Yeah! And the thing is that like this empathy kind of made a difference, but what really made a difference was numbers. Because, you know, business. So like, World Health Organization numbers helped us out a ton, right? Like 1.3 billion visually impaired users. These are potential users that might not use our app if we didn't adjust for this, right? 826 million near vision impairment users, and 36 million blind users. Like, that's a lot of people. And if you're not designing for it, like, look at all the potential people who could be using your app and who you could care for. And for Lyft, this was incredibly important because if you think about it, transportation is difficult, right? Like, if you're a blind person, getting from point A to point B usually means you need a lot of help. You need to call a car service, you could potentially call a taxi, but Lyft went out and was like, okay, great, we're gonna say that we're gonna help blind users, and what that means is like offering them a form of transportation that they didn't have before. So, through settings and lots of data, we were able to make big changes, which is super exciting, to make sure that we're caring about more of our users. So, yada! We did it, right? We got color contrast, we got tap targets, we got legibility, amazing, and everyone follows it all of the time. Nope. No, of course not. Because it's hard, and it's a product company, and we have to do this all the time, and I'm sure you guys also have to do this all the time. And we still fight these little battles every day where we tug and pull and make these decisions. So the more of you who use these scrappy prototypes, settings, empathy building, user testimonials that we just went over, and I'm not there, the more likely inclusive design is to win against all these other odds. Thanks.